The goal is to improve your team as you push towards the fantasy playoffs. And at this point in the season, the best way to do that is through trades. So here are the players you should trade for before week 10. And we begin with Kyren Williams, who has announced that he should be returning from injury in week 12 after a bye week, and then he has one more week on the IR. Now, the last time we saw Williams, things were pretty good. He ended up rushing for over 150 yards against the Arizona Cardinals, most of this in the second half. And while he had his high ankle sprain, which isn't great for the injury, he actually came back in and got a touchdown for his fantasy owners. But as I mentioned, he did sustain a high ankle sprain. Normally he's going to keep you out about 4 weeks, and that's what he did. He got put on IR. So since then, Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman have split the Rams backfield, but neither of them have been as good as Kyren. Once Kyren comes back from injury, he'll go right back to his elite role, as you can see right here on Fantasy Life, our official data partner. In his starts from weeks 2 to week 6, when he was the clear starter, he saw 88% of the snaps and 80% of the rush attempts. But not only that, look at this, 74% of the routes run. This is an elite role. Only Christian McCaffrey has seen a better role for his team this year. Now, it appears that Matt Stafford will return after the bye week in week 11, and then Kyren Williams will be 1 week behind him due to the IR rules in week 12, which means Kyren's going to return against the Cardinals, the team we last saw him against go for 150 plus yards. The Cardinals are a bottom 3 run defense. This is a nice spot to buy low and then have immediate impact once he returns. So there's one running back we're interested in, a guy you can buy low as he's still injured and on the IR. Now, here's another RB that I want to get. I'm actively trying to acquire Kenneth Walker because his last 2 games haven't been that great, but still everything for him looks okay. Now, this started in week 8, and we talked about it last week. In week 8, he saw a season low 44% of the snaps and 44% of the rush attempts. But then we had to add the context that he missed practice Wednesday and Thursday of that week, and he was dealing with an injury coming into the game. And because of this, we saw the rookie Zach Charbonnet get more run, and he was pretty good. On his 7 touches, he had 64 yards. He continued to average strong yards per touch, and this one was over 9 yards per touch. But as I said last week, this was probably due to the injury and just a random flow of how the carries went in the game, quote unquote, the hot hand. So Walker did nothing in week 8, and then it continued in week 9 where it actually got worse. Just 2.7 fantasy points on his 10 touches for 17 yards. Now, again, this was a very difficult matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, one of the best defenses in the league, and Seattle got down by 3 or 4 scores most of the game. But overall now, it's been back-to-back stinker weeks for the guy who owns him and manages him in your league, so maybe he's starting to get frustrated and it's a chance to buy low. But the quietly good news was that Kenneth Walker seemed to be over his injury, and as you can see right here, his rush attempts, the rush percentage, he saw 62% of the carries for the team this week, up from 44% last week. And before these 2 bad games, Walker averaged 17.5 points and was never under 10.7 points in any game. Look, his role is elite, and he's just going through a weird stretch right now. I will admit that his schedule the rest of the season isn't all that great when you scroll down a little bit and you see, as the playoffs approach for fantasy, the 49ers, the Cowboys, the 49ers again, and then the Eagles will be your matchups before the fantasy playoffs. But the tough matchups are okay if we assume that you're buying low on him. You're getting him at a value. It kind of already bakes in all potential downsides like difficult matchups. Let's stay on the running back train and go to David Montgomery, another running back like Kyren Williams who will be returning from injury, and he'll actually be returning from injury more than likely for week 10. So we talked about it in the past that you needed to buy him. Right now you do, because it's time to shine. Montgomery's been out with a rib injury, and it's a very low re-injury rate for running backs. It's mostly just a pain tolerance thing, and they chose to play it safe with him. And if we take you back to the last times we saw him healthy in weeks 4 and weeks 5, he was commanding 72% of the snaps, as you can see right here on Fantasy Life, and 70% of the rush attempts. This was elite usage. So elite that he was averaging 29 opportunities per game during that time, and when he's been healthy in spurts in other games as well. And Dan Campbell deemed him multiple times since then their workhorse back. So you're getting a potential workhorse running back in the NFL's number 3 ranked offense behind a top 5 offensive line. Yes, that is very good, and his value is just not perceived as high as it was maybe 6 weeks ago on Thursday Night Football, where he popped off for 3 touchdowns. Now, of course, since then, since he's been hurt, there's been changes. Jahmyr Gibbs has seen a large role, and he's been producing very well. Over these last 2 games without Montgomery, Gibbs has played 78% of the snaps and handled 70% of the rush attempts, and has continued to be highly efficient. He's top 10 in true yards per carry, and when you factor in his receiving ability, he's 12th overall, averaging 5.4 yards per touch. This is more efficient than David Montgomery, but here's the thing. Dan Campbell basically said that yes, this backfield might become a split, but then you had to read more into it. He said that they're still going to see their same roles basically, and threw out there that Jahmyr will still get his touches, and he was already getting his 8 to 10 touches when Montgomery was healthy. I think it's going to go right back, maybe a little bit more Jahmyr Gibbs usage. Either way, if you're getting him at a fair price, and you could use all those things about Jahmyr Gibbs potentially taking over the backfield, seeing more touches to your advantage in negotiations to buy low on him. Now, this next RB is coming off his first bad week in a very long time, so you finally have a chance to buy low. Now, before we get into the next player, 65% of people who watch this, maybe even you, are not subscribed. And a lot of people just don't know. It takes 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and really helps me out. And maybe you won't be able to buy extremely low because his role for the most part of the season in this Chiefs offense has been great for Isaiah Pacheco, but he only had 6.6 points in week 9. But as you you can see here, his strong role continued. He saw 16 carries. Now, he wasn't all that highly efficient on these carries, averaging just over 4 yards per touch against Miami, but still the usage was there. And the usage was there in a major way. The lack of a touchdown or big game on the ground kind of hid the fact that he saw season high usage in this one. Look at this right here on Fantasy Life. In week 9, 70% of the snaps, a season high, 76% of the carries, a season high, and 54% of the routes run, a season high. He became and pushed closer towards a full down, 3 down workhorse back. He actually saw for the second straight week more passing game usage than Jerick McKinnon. And now over his last 6 games, he's averaging 20 opportunities per game. That's something that like only 10 running backs, if that, will do at the end of the year. And he's been much more efficient than last year. Check this out. He ranks 12th in yards per touch and 5th in running back receiving efficiency this season. Now, Kansas City does have a tough matchup, I won't lie to you, against the Eagles next week, the number 1 defense. They allow the least yards and fantasy points to opposing running backs, but then after that, it gets a little bit better. They get the Raiders, they get the Packers, and if you scrolled a little bit more, they would get the Raiders again. So really, like 3 out of their next 5 weeks are good matchups. Even the Bills matchup is good. The Bills have been injured with Matt Milano, with some pieces in their second unit going down. This is a situation where the Bills' run defense now is actually bottom 5 over the last 4 weeks. So I'm trying to buy low on David Montgomery and this next RB. And that man's name is Tony Pollard, who's been really frustrating for people. And it started hitting its tipping point when he came out of the bye week in week 8, and the Cowboys actually looked really good, dropping 43 points, winning by 23, and he still only got 6 fantasy points. Womp, womp, womp. And then heading into week 9, we warned you last week that he had this sketchy spot of the week facing those Eagles, who again allowed the least yards and fantasy points to opposing RBs. And this led to a situation where Pollard wasn't all that great. 15 touches for just 63 yards. It's like 4.5 yards per touch. Now, he did have a couple of blown up runs in here, so if you take those 2 or 3 out, he actually was really efficient on his other 10 touches, but you can kind of do that for like every running back in every game. Now, the more interesting thing was this was like one of the only times, one of 2 times this year, that the Cowboys were in a competitive game the entire time, going back and forth, that didn't become a blowout in the second half or fourth quarter. And this led to solid usage for Pollard, who saw 76% of the snaps. That's great, but his 71% of the rush attempts were his most since week 3, when they really only had their other close game. So Pollard has been going through some brutal matchups and just weird situations where he's not playing the fourth quarter in half of the games this year, and because of that, he's got an unfair rap. And I get it, he hasn't been as efficient, but look at his schedule coming up. He will get the Giants, and then he will get the Panthers. These are 2 bottom 5 run defenses where the Cowboys should hopefully play with a 1-2 score lead, and Pollard should be able to run from ahead. The guy who has Tony Pollard in your league is beyond frustrated, similar to Devontae Adams fantasy owners, and you could buy extremely low potentially on them right now. I'm also looking to buy DeAndre Swift because he hasn't had a top 10 RB performance in a month now, but everything still looks good for him because he posted under 10 points in week 9, but this was a tough matchup against the Cowboys where he still puts up 74 yards, and more importantly, he earns over 20 opportunities and 20 touches. Now, even though the points have been lower these past 2 weeks, DeAndre Swift is still seeing very good, as you can see right here, usage. During this time, over these last 2 games, he's played 71 and 63% of the snaps, and more importantly, 76% of the carries, RB1 usage, and then 67% of the carries, RB1 usage. And then we saw in week 9, Jalen Hurts, who seems like he's been playing injured all year long. Well, it looks like he got another injury in this game. SportsMD Analysis on Twitter calls out that it looks like it potentially could be an MCL sprain, which is normally just going to be something that would keep a guy out for a week or 2. Jalen Hurts probably not going to sit out, but it will limit his mobility, which could mean more checkdowns for DeAndre Swift and more rush attempts. So Swift's role is quietly getting better, and the outlook looks pretty good for him as well, and he's been a top 10 running back since week 2. Maybe you can buy low. Also worth pointing out that his upcoming matchup should feature a lot of points against the Bills, which you can beat that defense, especially at home, and the Chiefs. If you have any shot of buying low on Swift, he's one of the guys out of all the guys we've talked about right now that I'd start to prioritize. And I'd prioritize in grabbing the fantasy blueprint if your goal is to win your matchup this week, push towards the playoffs, and take home a fantasy championship. Every day of the week, I will send you a tool that will help you and thousands of other fellas do just that. You can see right here, waiver tiers, rest of season rankings, projections rankings, game by game notes, updated throughout the week and throughout the weekend. Here's an example of the game by game notes that you can see from a previous Cowboys game. We can look at CeeDee Lamb. You can see right here, CeeDee Lamb, what he's doing on the season is pointing in here where he's seeing his targets, his ADOT, his matchup against the cornerback, the pound advantage, the overall speed advantages in here. You can see just differences in terms of what the cornerback is allowing in zone and man coverage. This is all just a small snippet of what you get in the game by game notes and the overall blueprint. To get your blueprint today that 4,000 plus other people are already using, just scan the QR code on the screen or click the link in the description below. And here's the deal. You'll follow these 2 simple steps. It's only $5 for the rest of the year, but if you don't make your fantasy playoffs because maybe your team is just 4-4, you dealt with some injuries, it's getting close, it's kind of a 50-50. Look, if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I'll just refund your $5. No questions asked. Just reach out to me. So there you go. This is risk-free. All you got to do to get access to your blueprint today is scan the QR code on the screen or click that link in the description below. The next man up is Jerome Ford, who was one of the most expensive waiver wire ads when Nick Chubb went down. Then he's been up and down since then, dealing with his own injuries. Then he signed Kareem Hunt, but things are starting to look up for him after his past week. Now, don't get me wrong. He only scored 12.7 points. That's not great, especially against a Cardinals defense that has been brutal this year, but he didn't score a touchdown. So he did it all through the air and his overall yardage. 77 yards, catching 5 of 7 targets. He earned a 25% target share in this game for a running back. That's unreal. And then when you break down the numbers, you can see that he played 63% of the snaps, the most since Kareem Hunt has been there, and handled 54% of the rush attempts, also the most since Kareem Hunt has been there, seeing also his most passing game usage as well during that time. Ford is now averaging a pretty solid and respectable 4.8 yards per touch, and he's finally seeming to be healthy. We saw a glimpse of this at halftime of last week when he started seeing more touches, and then in week 9's game. And he's a guy that you want to trade for because he just saw his most usage, his highest split of overall opportunity since Hunt has been there, indicating that he looks healthy and he's a talented second-year back. And then you look at this right here. Look, in the fantasy playoffs, he'll start off against the Bears and the Texans. Not many guys will have better matchups to start their playoff stretch. So I'm looking to acquire Ford in this next wide receiver. And that man's name is Terry McLaurin, who yet again in week 9 had a very solid day. Terry sees 7 more targets and 73 yards. Without scoring a touchdown in a solid matchup, will take these 12.3 points on a quote-unquote down week. Now, McLaurin is directly benefiting from Washington throwing so much. Sam Howell is on pace to set the pass attempt record by more than 50 attempts, passing what Tom Brady did a couple years ago. And this means that even in not the greatest games for McLaurin, like this past week where he only earned 14% of the targets, he could still put up respectable performances. Because right now his usage is great. He ranks 3rd in routes run this season and 14th in targets. The fella is a clear top 24 wide receiver, and if you start scoring more touchdowns, it's only going to go up. Because as you can see right here, he has 3 total touchdowns this year. Players who have a similar amount of targets as he has, ranking in the top 12 or so, top 15, they're seeing about 4 or 5. So he's due for a couple more. And he has a great stretch of games coming up. As you can see right here, he'll be taking on the Seahawks, bottom 10 secondary, the Giants, bottom 10 secondary, a tougher spot against the Cowboys, but you can beat this Cowboys secondary, and then a nice matchup against Miami. The Commanders defense is terrible, leading to more passing for the offense, which is an advantage for Terry McLaurin. Cooper Kupp's another buy low candidate. As he enters the bye week, he just had a stinker, but it was with Brett Ripe, and I'm not holding that against him. The week before wasn't all that great either, and now he goes into the bye, so it'll be like a month since he produced for the guy who has him in your league. Maybe that guy is desperate, and you can send a trade out for him. It might be worth trying to trade for Khalil Herbert. Now, I would put him below the other guys we talked about who are coming off of injuries, but here's the deal. Before the game that he got injured in on Thursday Night Football, he saw 80% of the snaps. They were trying to make him the workhorse, and nobody has really stood out. Like, we've seen Deontay Foreman have a couple of good games, really just one, and it was mostly based on the volume he was getting in touchdowns, but Herbert might be somebody that they want to go back to as a long-term option. And then some wide receivers to try and trade for is both of the Bucs wide receivers. This game was really weird for Tampa Bay. Cade Otton was the big high scorer in the game. Rachaad White got involved in the passing game. That's not going to happen every week. These guys are still nice buy lows. So if you want to improve your team, trading is the way to do so, and these guys will make the biggest impact for you for the lowest cost. Another way to improve your team is on the waiver wire, and this video right here will show you exactly who the key guys to add are before week 10. Now, before you go, double check that you're not one of the 65% of people who are not subscribed to the channel. It helps me out as we push towards 100,000 subscribers and makes it easier to see my future content.